Hi, welcome to Curious Joel, a show about curiosity taking us deeper into the topics of people's passion and interesting conversation. I'm your host, Joel Circo. Wow, I can do my name, I swear. Uh, my guest today is Jeff Gomez. How are you doing today, Jeff?
Doing great. Good to be here, Joel.
Thank you very much for being on the show. So tell everyone, what is your passion?
Joel, my passion is to create bridges of communication between people.
Okay.
I don't much care what medium, and
Okay.
usually it's through story or some form of narrative. I believe
Gotcha.
that story, which has recently been used to separate people, is the most effective device or tool that can be used to unite people. And so that's my business. I'm in the business of a storytelling that unifies.
I like that. I like that verbiage because like that connection is something that I try very hard to get with this podcast. Like it's not just an interview with a bunch of questions that you can type out answers to and then be like, here's all my answers for everything. It's really about that connection and helping other people feel connected to that person.
I've
I
noticed
like
that
that.
about your podcast, Joel, and it's one of the reasons I'm here.
Have you listened to some episodes?
Of course.
Okay, cool. Not everyone that I've interviewed, not everyone has listened to it, so I do appreciate that. But
Sure
yeah,
thing.
it's about that connection, and I like that. Like, so really quick, uh, what is your job specifically for those that don't know?
Well, my title is CEO. I'm the CEO of Starlight Runner.
Okay.
It's a production company that's based in New York City that
Hmm.
specializes in the production of content across multiple media.
Hmm.
That effectively makes me a producer. And
Okay.
I'm a producer registered with the Producers Guild of America. Um,
Okay.
uh, but in my heart, I'm a creator. I'm a writer.
Hmm.
I think of fabulous giant story worlds and
Hmm.
either original stories, or I help my clients, like the big Hollywood studios or video game companies or comic book companies, to maximize the potential of the stories that they are telling.
So your company is a transmedia company, which from what I was reading up on, and for the audience that doesn't know, like basically it takes from what you're advertising on the front, you take stories that are there, and then you kind of weave them into everyday life. Am I close?
Close.
Okay.
You know, in the 20th century, you tended to make a story that
Hmm.
was specific to one individual platform, and that's where it was going to stay. Right?
Right.
A
Right.
movie was a movie. A
Right.
game was a game.
Yeah.
In this day and age, content is expensive, and so you want your story or story world to persist, to
Hmm.
become almost like a franchise or
Right.
a brand that everybody knows. In order to make that happen, your story has to exist successfully across different media. I
Yeah.
understand how to develop stories so that it does that in a successful way, not in a way that's kind of a crappy experience because it's just a
Hmm.
knockoff of a story from the movies, but that
Yeah.
it tells something new and interesting and different
Right.
about these characters in this world.
Yeah. Sorry, I just was thinking about Spaceballs. Spaceballs, and then the Spaceballs, the flamethrower, Spaceballs, the T-shirt. You know, uh,
I see you're a nerd just like me.
a little bit, just a little bit. You can't tell by like my D&D books up there.
Yes, I can.
But yeah, so like that would be kind of Spaceballs. The blank is kind of would fit into that not great storytelling. That's just kind of like throwing a label on a thing and then being like, here's it's part of the story, you know. But you kind of trying to make sure that it's a meaningful connection, that you're actually like that primary story, that whether it's a movie or video game, is being seen as more than just that, right?
That is exactly correct.
Yeah.
It's seen as almost real, as something you
Mm,
can dive deep into and enjoy in different ways.
okay. Um, so we will be diving into that aspect a little bit later. But first, how did you find this? Like, how did you get to be the CEO slash producer working with these really cool companies? Like, what was your like, you know what? I'm going to start storytelling across platforms that like what was that moment for you?
Everything I know, I learned from Dungeons and Dragons.
All right. I am my interest has never been more piqued than right now. How you use D&D to build like for inspiration to build what you've built.
There is no question about it. There
Okay.
are direct links and ties to
Okay.
Dungeons and Dragons in throughout my career, even
All
now.
right. Okay.
And it's very powerful, and I'm deeply appreciative of Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, the
Mm-hmm.
creators of Dungeons and Dragons,
Right.
but also all the wonderful people in the role-playing game industry who have
Mm-hmm.
added to the conversation about
Absolutely.
world design
Mm-hmm.
and participative narrative. All of
Right.
these things are vital to my job today.
So can you give us like that first like connection to from like Dungeons and Dragons to I'm gonna start doing transmedia, production. Like what was the epiphany moment or that like that career change or whatever it was that started you on this path?
Oh, it started really early. So
Okay.
I'm an example of somebody who started dreaming about what my life could be like when I was essentially a kid.
Okay.
I was playing Dungeons and Dragons because I had no other kind of instantaneous means of telling stories. I was very
Sure.
much alone. When you're a nerd in the 1970s,
It's not an easy place.
no, you're pretty isolated.
Yeah.
So even the process of reaching out to people and getting them to play with me, to play
Mm-hmm.
Dungeons and Dragons, was a conversation I had to teach myself to have and to summon the courage to connect with someone else enough to convince them to come sit around my table. These were not other nerds.
Right. Yeah. It back then it was a very sparse amount of people that were like, oh, this sounds like a fun thing for cool jocks to play.
Nope.
Yeah, I've heard some stories. I do play with some people that have like used to play D&D back in the day, and like it was just a hard spot. It was a hard thing because of you're playing a math game. Really? That's your idea of fun? You're gonna pretend to be something and then roll dice, and you have to do math to play. And then on the other side, I know came under a lot of fires like this demonic game. It was worse than a Ouija board. It was basically you're basically going to get possessed if you play it, and it's worshiping demons and stuff like that. So you had like it's a nerdy thing and it's demonic, and then you're like, well, it's just kind of fun for everybody, and you're sitting in that like weird midpoint of, well, I'm not saying it's stupid, but I'm also not saying it's demonic. Can it just be a game? And so you're trying to reach out to people going, hey, get past both of these barriers of it is cool and it's not demonic, and then you have to get past those barriers. And so I would imagine that conversation that you've developed would be quite strategic.
Well, Joel, it was the first lesson I learned that I use to this day
Okay.
is um, is what is in it for you, my audience, right? Because the
Okay.
guys that I was dealing with were not interested in math.
Right.
They liked heavy metal. They liked hard rock music. They liked the
Okay.
paintings on the covers of the rock albums that
Sure.
evoked these fantastical worlds
Mm-hmm.
and so forth back then in the late 70s.
Right.
So I said, I would what I learned quickly was, how do I let this person know that the wishes that they have, the
Mm-hmm.
wishes that nobody else really cared about,
Right.
and when you think about it, Joel, how many people care about what you wish for? How many?
I mean, it's a short list. It's a
It's a
short,
short
very
list,
short list.
right?
Yeah.
How many people would actually sit there for hours and listen to you talk about it and fantasize about what you would do if you
Right.
had access to the fulfillment of these wishes? That is extraordinarily valuable. So that was the role that I played. What do
Mm-hmm.
you wish for? You are now in a world. Let's imagine. I
Right.
might give you a can of beer and some
There's
pizza.
snacks.
You're going to play a little Rush, but then you're going to tell me what you would do if you had power, if you
Yeah.
had magic, if you had to rescue the princess.
Yeah.
What would you do? And
Right.
and they would start slowly but surely telling me, and
Yeah.
and that would be role play.
Right.
And if they saw that I cared about what they wanted, that I wasn't just there to destroy them
Right.
or upset their notions, but to
Mm-hmm.
surprise and delight them with those aspirations, then
Mm-hmm.
they were going to come back next week. And the
Right.
week after, and the week after, and the week after. And little by little, then they would say, well, wait a minute. How did this world get created? What's the lore? Where's that person coming from? What's their history?
Yeah.
Nothing better for me, because
And then you're like, I got them,
I
hook, line,
got.
sinker. They're way too involved to back out now.
Think about how media works today.
Mm-hmm.
Today, a story can unfold, and you have an instantaneous response from thousands, even millions of people, because
Yeah.
everyone has a voice.
Right.
Every person who's telling a big story in the
Mm-hmm.
media is a dungeon master. And if you ignore
Hmm.
your players,
Right.
if you don't engage them in an ongoing dialogue, it's very easy for them to turn against you or
Well,
to abandon you.
yeah, I know that Marvel has been struggling with that recently. Like, there's just been they've been just well, might be a little controversial, but Disney as a whole has been struggling with that recently because they have so many IPs that they're just like throwing one thing out after the other, and people are like, these aren't the stories we were asking for. There's nothing that we were asking for. We were asking for this, that, and the other, and you're throwing out this other stuff that is focusing on stuff we don't really care about that much. Like, okay, you kind of did a cool job, but like, we didn't need this show. We wanted that show. We wanted to focus on this character that you kind of hinted at that you're going to be talking about, and now you're just going off in some other direction somewhere. And so, like, between Marvel and Star Wars are the two ones that I'm more familiar with, of people like listening to people complain constantly about, like, why did we have these shows? What was
So,
the point of the
Joel,
show?
your point is extremely well taken, but it actually applies to almost anything to do
Yeah.
with running a business in this
Mm-hmm.
country today. What happens is that if you get into the abundance mindset, hey, this is making X amount of dollars, so all I
Mm-hmm.
have to do to make more dollars is vastly increase my output. What that does is it stops the listening. Imagine if we were dungeon masters,
Right.
and said, you know what, we're going to have 5 sessions a week instead of 1.
Jeez Louise.
And I'm going to pump out hours and hours of content, but
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not going to bother listening to you anymore because I
Right.
have to get this next session done tomorrow.
Right.
Do you see? You're creating distance between yourself and your audience, and you're no longer
Right.
listening to them. And
Right.
and they get aggravated because they liked when you listened to them.
Yeah.
And it makes them really angry when you're not listening to them. And that creates a rift.
Well, I also know as a dungeon master who has run games for lots of different people, I worked at a summer camp. And so every summer we had new people that were in, and like I've dealt with some people that like if you're not engaging them every 4 seconds, they stop listening. And then me as a dungeon master, because I'm a human being, go, well, if you're not going to listen, why do I even care what you want? Like, you know, and that divide and like I've done some long sessions before. I've done some long sessions that I was fully engaged for 8 hours. We played until stupid o'clock in the morning, and I was engaged the whole time. I'm going, yeah, what's next? What's next? But I've also had those similar sessions where like people are like, well, they still want to do stuff, but they don't want to listen to anything I'm saying. And then I'm trying to like essentially trying to railroad them into what they want to do, and they're not listening. I'm like, well, okay, I don't know. You find it, I guess, you know? And so the longer that I, as a dungeon master, I'm trying to produce stuff for them, and the less they're listening, the lazier I get, because I'm like, well, what's the point of putting in the effort? Yeah.
You have just described what we call engification.
Okay.
Do you see that? And do you see how there are companies, not just entertainment companies, that are like starting to do this, and then it creates an adversarial relationship.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of companies that I've seen that like five years ago I would have sworn by them, like they make the best product in the world, and then I'm like looking at it going like, what is this? What I buy this thing regularly because it is such a great product, and now you're just kind of like giving me this partially done, half-baked product that I'm like, but you guys were like everything. You guys were the perfect storm of amazing product, of price and quality and like lifetime, like all these things, and then now it's just like,
Joel, it can also be dangerous. Look at social media and what it has had to kind of lower itself to in order to continue to try and increase the amount of revenues they're generating. It enshittifies the experience. It makes us angry. We start doom scrolling. Certain platforms become kind of cesspools. It's a bad experience that actually can make us angry and create problems between one another. And that's a big concern. It is counter to the very passion that I outlined for you at the very beginning. Story is a unifier, a uniter, not something that divides. When it does, problems follow.
Yeah. Wow. I was not expecting this to be so heavily tied to Dungeons and Dragons. See, this is one of my favorite parts of interviews, when something just takes an answer or turn in something. I'm like, all right, cool. I mean, this is awesome, but would not have imagined in a million years that this is what we were talking about is, well, you know how all these big companies, they're basically dungeon masters. Like,
there's a reason I'm here, Joel.
I mean, yes. Yeah, obviously. Yeah, that's awesome. So you started with trying to figure out how to get people to play this game you love so much, and that turned into telling stories to get people interested into things that they might not have even known existed in like big time media, right?
Sure.
Okay. So like,
and where that comes from next is I started working with comic book companies and video game companies, and what's going to allow for the continued success of intellectual properties in those media? Well, you need integrity, particularly in Western audiences, like consistency,
continuity,
canon, the things that made me happy
Right.
because someone was simulating reality, simulating a
Right.
fantastical universe that felt real.
Yeah.
I took it upon myself in those companies to not just create that for those companies, because those companies sometimes didn't care that much about it. The
Sure.
executives, they're like, "What are you talking about, canon?" you
Just
know,
make us more money, and that's
make
all
us
we
more
care
money,
about.
or just do let the character do whatever the writer feels like doing with that character. You see what I'm
Hmm.
saying?
Hmm.
And I would read the fan mail, and the fans were disappointed. They didn't want
Right.
that. So I helped to create a kind of canonical Bibles and things like that. And then I took it one more step. I said, you need to allow for the fans to feel as if they have a voice. You have to
Right.
communicate with them. Be the dungeon master. Talk to
Right.
the fans in between sessions,
Right.
right? And so
Yeah.
forth. And I took that upon myself, and everything that I was involved with when it came to that became really successful.
I would
And
imagine.
so I started to create comic books and video games that had intense fan followings, and that helped to launch my career. I was involved in Magic the Gathering. I was involved in Turok Dinosaur Hunter for the Nintendo
Yeah.
64, helping to build out those universes and cultivate those fan bases.
Gotcha. Yeah, because you probably is not going to be surprised to you that I also play Magic.
Yep.
I've just finished building my very first commander deck from scratch. Um, but really quick, just if you can kind of summarize, like, what was your role in Magic the Gathering?
Well, if you're playing the commander deck, a few of my characters who were invented in the mid 1990s are in that deck. Um,
Okay.
so Jared Carthalion was a character from my Dungeons and Dragons game in the 1980s. Um, I transposed him to the world of Dominaria when I was creating the Magic the Gathering comic books and video games. Wizards of
Okay.
the Coast gave me a continent on Dominaria and said, you can make the origins of some of the most popular Magic the Gathering characters here. But of
Uh-huh.
course, I lifted a continent out of my story world, my
Right.
Dungeons
And
and
just
Dragons world, and that was the
put it
continent.
as a dungeon master, as someone that's built continents and stuff like that, being able to go, I'm going to share this with the rest of the world, and you're going to not even realize that this is my little campaign somewhere. Here you go. Have fun playing with my cards now.
So, Joel,
Yeah.
I am well aware that that was a dream come true. Even at the time, I said,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this is happening.
Right.
And it's happening pretty big. Those comic books sold millions of copies. Those video games did quite well.
Yeah.
And those were my characters. Some of them were Watsy's, like Dakon Blackblade. I created his origin in the comics, but Dakon was given to me by Watsy, Wizards of the Coast, and so it all kind of mixed together to create this fabulous universe,
Yeah.
and it showed me, Joel, that it was possible for someone from rather humble beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
I was a poor kid from the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Puerto
Mm-hmm.
Rican. Things like this aren't supposed to happen to guys like me. And yet there was a path to not just success, but like fulfilling dreams. I could be a dungeon master to thousands and thousands of people.
Right, right. But that's an incredible feeling as someone that's done a very short D&D podcast that didn't go very far. Like, that was something that I liked, the fact that I'm getting to share my character story. I wasn't dungeon mastering this the podcast, but like, I got to share my characters story, his journey, his past, his present, and his hopes and dreams, and like I get to share that with a few thousand people. It wasn't, again, it didn't last very long, but like that's
Okay.
something that I'm hoping that with my show, that if I can get stuff rolling here and start making money off of this, I want to be kind of doing more of that storytelling across different platforms, of being able to go back and do another D&D podcast that, you know, actually runs a full season, do some more stuff that I get to get more in depth on more specific topics, and do stuff like that, because like being able to share something that I think is so cool and so important with so many people is literally like that's what I'm doing here, you know. And the fact that you got to just take like your little slice of D&D and go, here's some cards you can play with, enjoy my luscious backstory, my intricate like world that I've made, and you get to go battle your friends with my characters, have fun, and you're welcome. That's just incredible.
Absolutely, Joel. So, but here was the next step, and it's appropriate for what it is that you're talking about. Once that happened to me, I realized that I was kind of wearing blinders. In other words,
Okay.
the world told me who I was and what I was supposed to be, and yet somehow I navigated around all that to actualize that dream. And this is in the mid 1990s, 25, 30 years ago. And so I said, what else am I not seeing? You know, let me take off these blinders to look at the full spectrum of what is possible. And if I somehow amplify these capabilities, you know, call my shot on a bigger pool table.
Okay.
Maybe it can happen. Right. And so I formed Starlight Runner Entertainment in 2000 and said, you know, I'm going to do this not just for, you know, a trading card game. I'm going to do this for Hollywood studios and big giant toy companies and things like that. And I took the model that I used on with Wizards of the Coast and with Turok for Acclaim Entertainment, and did it with Hot Wheels for Mattel, and then Pirates of the Caribbean for Disney, and then Avatar for James Cameron, you know, and Halo for Microsoft.
Yeah. I was going to say, that's one of the big things that pops up on Starlight Runner's website is just Halos right there. And it's like, unfortunately, I'm not I didn't grow up with Halo or anything like that. I didn't grow up with money video games, but like, I have friends that like will lose their mind over anything Halo. And like, they've been excited about every single release of Halo. They were horribly disappointed with the show that came out from the guy that openly said, by the way, I never played it, I don't know anything about it, I'm just going to make a movie the show that's basically Halo-ish.
They broke my like, cardinal rule.
Excuse me? Like, even if someone that's not even in that fandom, anything like that, I'm sitting going like, that's just wrong. Like, it's one thing to be like, oh, I'm a little ignorant about the subject, but I'm going to try and stay true to, like, no, he's like, I don't care, I don't know anything about it, I'm just going to make a show about Halo. It's like,
I'm mystified by that, frankly, because for many years they followed a transmedia strategy that we devised with them, and for 10 good years they were highly effective.
Yeah.
And then that show came along, and well, you know, we've talked about what happens when IP goes off the rails.
Yeah, and aren't they making another Halo show that's supposed to be like more accurate? Again, not in the fandom, but I believe that after that one was like, no, they decided to do another one.
Talking about it, it's going to be a while.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I didn't realize I'm on talking with the person that actually would have the best insight into that. But yeah, so like you worked with some really big companies on some really big projects. Like, so let's just talk about Halo for a little bit. I have other questions I need to get to, but my curiosity again, very strong, and I just kind of like want
Sorry,
to know.
audience, we're nerding out a little bit.
Well, hopefully the audience is very, very much into what we're talking about, and even if they don't like the specific subject, the ideas behind it,
There are takeaways, yes, and that's my point.
yeah,
These apply to all kinds of aspects of life.
right. And audience, like I said, I'm not a Halo fan. I'm just curious about like, what does that look like for a video game? What does a transmedia company like do to help them? Like, it's a video game. They've had several different, releases on the Xbox. What else do you do besides video game? Like, let them make video games. Like, what else do you do?
in the case of something like Halo, I'm not saying this is exactly what we did with Halo, but something like Halo, the first thing we do is what do you want from us?
Right.
And the answer is we want to turn Master Chief and the universe of Halo into a perennial brand. We want this product to be evergreen.
Yeah.
Meaning that it's not just making its mark on pop culture right now. This is a character that we want to transcend time with.
Yeah. And I know you make a mention of perennial in on your website somewhere. For the audience, can you explain what perennial is and what the opposite of that would be?
Sure. Well, a fad or a kind of flash in the pan, an intellectual property that comes out, is kind of hot for a little while, and then disappears, is something that used to happen all the time, in pop culture. It still does. But today, success is measured in return on investment. So if you're investing millions and millions of dollars into Halo, you want that brand and that character, Master Chief, or Assassin's Creed, or any of these big video game or movie franchises. You want it to persist. So they come to me because I can kind of point out where brands stumble or even disappear. And where other brands, particularly story brands, where they persist and become perennials, or what we call evergreen. An evergreen property is like Barbie or Hot Wheels or Batman or Spider-Man.
Yeah.
These are characters.
I've never met a kid that doesn't know who Batman and Spider-Man or Hot Wheel. Like, every kid has those things.
Everyone knows them. And they somehow figure out how to renew or rebirth these properties again and again and again. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Pokemon, those are evergreen properties. So, so you'd come to me, and what I would do is I would look at everything that's done so far. Right. So that's the first thing my company does: absorb every single thing that you've ever done. For example, with Halos, we'd have not just the games, but all your annotation, all of your any tie-ins that you've done so far. We'd interview every key person involved in the creation of the project. Why do we do that? Because we want to know what was in your head. What
you're building the continuity.
It's not just continuity,
but like
passion. What was why did you do this? What were you responding to in your personal life? That manifested these characters and this storyline.
Well, with the continuity, it's not just what was written down. It's what's the driving force. It's the thought process of the backstory. Even if the backstory wasn't written, like, there's so many times that I've had characters or something like that, or watched characters in something that I'm like, I'm watching, and I'm as someone that sees people, like really sees people, I'm watching this animated character, and then they try and throw this backstory at me. I'm like, that makes no sense for what they've done. Like you didn't get their act. That cannot be what they came from. Like you can't just make that up now.
That's
And so like
exactly
that
it.
continuity goes back to like what was the thought process? What was the initial want of that character? What made this writer go, and his name is Max. Why is it Max versus anything else? Well, it was just his parents thought it was like it was going to be Maxine, and then it was not, and this was Max. Now it's like, no, that's not what I wanted. Like, obviously, like that's not like his parents aren't like that. You know, like you just have this whole thing now that you're now as a audience member, you're upset, but you were trying to get to that like the motivators into the continuity of making sure that anything going forward is matching what was unspoken before.
But also it's a way to engender trust and in a way to get the creator to say, you listened carefully enough to me
Right.
that makes me think that you actually care about my child, my creation.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it all to you. I'm going to let you help me expand this universe so that it authentically manifests itself as a TV series or as
that's really smart.
an audio drama or whatever.
Right.
And guess where that all came from, Joel?
Dungeons and Dragons.
When I would ask those big-haired heavy metal guys with their bullet belts and and their sneers, why do you like this? What, where is this coming from that you are so passionate about how this character acts in my game? Tears come to their eyes because they're remembering something profound from their childhood, they're telling me a secret that they haven't told anyone. So guess what I'm doing with the creators of Halo or Avatar or Pirates of the Caribbean, Johnny Depp. I had that conversation with him about Jack Sparrow because nobody understood that character. No one. Where is this coming from? And tears came to his eyes when he confessed to me where Jack Sparrow came from. It had something.
Man, I would have loved to have been there for that conversation.
It was, he whispered it, so I had to lean forward real close.
Right.
He almost cried. And that's how, after that interview, he told Disney that if Jeff Gomez and Starlight Runner approve of anything Pirates of the Caribbean, it's an automatic approval from Johnny Depp.
That's crazy. That's incredible. So you basically had to borrow a very old terminology, you had basically Johnny Depp's signet ring of like, you can stamp anything for me of like.
It was a big challenge because Johnny had approval over his likeness, over the depiction of the character and so forth. And it would slow down because people were giving him stuff to approve, and he was off somewhere else in the world doing something. And so for us to be able to speed that up was a boon for everyone involved, for all the stakeholders. And that's why you hire myself and Starlight Runner. Gotcha. We can get that job done.
Because you do your due diligence in getting deep into the back like the unseen, unspoken, so that when new things come out, you can be like, no, they wouldn't do that.
We defend and protect it. Look, we don't want to antagonize creators who are brought on board.
Right.
We try to find an answer that will help to fulfill their creative wishes. Yeah. But we will take a stand if necessary. But
you can see, you get the motivation, you can get into the mind of the different IPs and go, this is not congruent with everything else. This goes outside of what has been established for it. Going back to my favorite D&D character that I've ever made, it was for that podcast. His name was Z-Dot. And if you looked at me and sat down and interviewed Z-Dot, I could answer almost every single question in the mind of Z-Dot. I hadn't written out all this stuff. I just knew Z-Dot enough that you asked me like, where does he go to summer or something like that, and I could be like, I could point on the map. It's like, oh, his favorite spot's right over here. Why? Well, because this is how he likes to relax. This is what he needs near him, and this is what he doesn't need near him to relax. And it's like, well, why do you know that? Because I'm in the mind of ZDOT, and like I know that. And you do that with these companies, with the IPs, with the different characters, where you get very deep into it so that you have that knowledge that you can go, I know what they like and what they don't like. I don't need to ask them. I can ask them, but I know what they're going to say about it.
That's right. And that has to do with philosophy. What is the fundamental philosophy that drives this character?
Yeah.
What is the message that's being conveyed by this character and this character's actions? So that's all storytelling. That's
right.
That's understanding the building blocks of story, which is how I first came up with my D&D campaigns. I studied Tolkien. I studied Tolkien's influences, dating all the way back to epic poetry and the great myths of the world and so forth. So, because I had to be an expert.
Yeah. Yeah, that's man, this is I was expecting a really fun interview. I was not expecting this level of fun and interest, and just I'm trying to get back to questions so we're not taking 4 hours before I even get to anything.
I did my homework, Joel.
I love it. I absolutely love it. But it is absolutely like, it's mind blowing, like how much depth you go into, because again, I mean, you've listened to my interviews. I like to, even if I haven't done any research on the person, I still like to get that information still. I like to get past what their normal responses are. I like to get past all that stuff so I can get to like what is driving them. And that is what you do for your day job, is just, but you do it not just for a person and what they're doing. You're doing that for an entire idea. You're doing it for a whole world of where does this all come from and how do I do it justice?
Joel, mind you, it's scalable, right? I started with individuals hanging out in the park, right. Getting them to play my game. But and I still do that to this day, because I'm a believer that if you're listening, if you're ready to cross a threshold, and you're an individual, whether you're in the media and entertainment business, or maybe a student who's very ambitious, I coach at the same time as I do all this once in a while, and so it works down to the individual level.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, nope, hold on. Sorry, one of my favorite things. It's a little. I feel like I'm doing a bad job every once in a while, because I'll look at something and go like, okay, I need to figure out where in my list of questions that I have written down, what have we already answered? Because I'm like, okay, well, that's already answered. That's already answered. That's already answered. And I'm like, okay, where do I go from here? So I guess the next best question, going to like the day to day, like what are some, like, what does a average day look like for you, like in the business?
Sure. My average day starts with the news.
Okay.
I need to understand what's happening in the world, not just in the United States, but everywhere in the world. What's going on? I was born on the spectrum, which means that for me, my strange little glitch is the ability to process lots of information, enormous amounts of information, and discern patterns. So I can anticipate trends and kind of forecast where things are going, or understand what's happening in a slightly different way than most people who are being fed their information in a very kind of thin bubble like
Linear manner.
situation. Yes, linear
Yeah.
manner. Um, so once I understand that, then I can go check my socials and make sure nothing horrific happens to
Right.
me.
Right.
And then I get about 200, 250 relevant emails every day, and I figured out how to go through them
Wow.
rather quickly
Yeah.
and deal with common matters. For example, this morning, um, Japan found out that one of their American licensees had the wrong information on a website, and needed it changed before it's advertised this weekend, before the product's advertised this weekend. It's Friday. How am I
Yeah.
going to do this? So I figure out who to communicate with, how to get the most effective email to that person possible. They received it because I know how to mark an email in a way that's going to get attention.
Sure.
They responded to me quickly and said, wow, it's really late. So I don't know. We're going to try, but I don't know if we're going to make it. I developed an alternate link, a different website that does the same job, sent it to the Japanese in case it's too late. And then within an hour, the company I was talking to said, we fixed it. So then I sent
Nice.
that link and said, either one is going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. So that's an example. I'm not just helping to develop giant universes.
Right. You're hands on.
I'm mediating two different nations, and these were big brands. These are,
Yeah.
giant things that are happening, and solving the problem in a quick and efficient way.
Right.
And at the same time, trying not to let that stress me out. Because it could be, if I fail,
Right.
somebody's going to be significantly disappointed. So
Right.
I've got to get the job done, and I can't let it get to me because I have a whole rest of the day to deal with, including
Right.
talking to you.
Which I appreciate you taking your time to talk.
So
Yeah.
those are examples of what I'm doing during the day. I'm looking at notes being sent to me about a script I wrote, or I'm attending a story breaking meeting because I'm also producing my own content, this time with Disney. It's my own universe, by the way, based on a role-playing game that I created in the late 1990s. Could you believe it?
Are you able to talk about that later?
No.
Darn it.
I can tell you, and this will ring some nerd bells, that my
Okay.
partner on this project is Ashley Eckstein, the voice of Ahsoka Tano in the animated Star Wars.
Okay.
And she is Ahsoka Tano for all intents and purposes, which is awesome because she's a dear friend. And yet, when I pick up the phone and it's her, I'm like, oh, it's Ahsoka. I'm talking to her.
That's awesome.
So again, dreams come true.
Yeah.
And she and I have created this universe, which is largely based on an old RPG that I created with Dungeons and Dragons rules, and it's happening with Disney.
That's really cool. Thank you for that little tidbit in there. Yeah.
There'll be more announced on it next year.
Okay. I'm looking forward to it already, and I have little information on what it is, but it sounds amazing.
I'm sure. Right up your alley.
I am absolutely sure. So, what does a bad day look like for you?
It's. I'm going to be honest, Joel. You can ride high for a few days at a time, thinking, I'm the best in the world at what I do. It may be a really weird, nerdy little niche thing. It's
Yeah.
made me some good money, and I have a good reputation, but someone somewhere along the line will come up to me and treat me like a nerd who doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
You know, or be disrespectful in a room full of people, and so forth. And look, I understand that. And can get over it generally pretty quickly. But
Mm.
what that reminds me of, the trigger that it's pulling, is, well, you were a nerdy kid in junior high school getting spitballs fired at the back of his head by the
Yeah.
jocks in the classroom, and it felt terrible. It felt like I was invisible, or something to be looked down on, or stepped on. So I have
Yeah.
to modulate myself because I can't get lost. Remember, I have lots to do, so
Right.
I can't let
Right.
that wreck my day. But it's still disconcerting when it happens, and I have to kind of right the ship quickly after that
Yeah.
does happen.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I can definitely see that, like, especially like it's different today when people are like, oh, it's nerdy to play D&D. Back in the day, it was a whole nother level of just of it was rough. It was really rough back then. And then having someone in today going, man, you're just still a nerd. It's like, and you just kind of want to sit there like, do you see what I'm doing? But that still hurts. That jab, the words, the emotions behind that still hurt, because they're like, well, maybe, like, because I know how that feels, not nearly on the same scale as you, but like when someone's like, boop, and it's like, well, maybe I am just that. Maybe that is all it is, and like you have to go and like fight that feeling of like, no, I'm doing something here.
That's right.
But yeah, I
That,
appreciate you sharing that with me.
you got it.
On the other side, what does a good day look like for you?
Um, well, a good day is waking up and thinking, I'm going to do something cool today, and it actually happens.
Nice and simple, but I love that. I absolutely love that.
Sure. And look, sometimes days are rough, so
Yeah.
I have to call that shot, and that's the
Mhm.
difference between sometimes a bad day and a good day. To remember to go, at 12 p.m. I'm going to be talking with Joel and getting to share a part of myself that I don't normally share. So that's going to be the highlight of my day, and it is.
Oh, that's really sweet. I'm very grateful that I could be a highlight of your day today. Uh, um, so in your um like in your day to day, like what are some skills? Sorry, not in day to day. When you were starting, what was a skill that you were not expecting that you needed? Like that you were like, oh, I have to figure this out. Like, what was a skill that you had to learn and adapt to be doing what you do?
Um, as a kid, um, my imagination was unfettered. In other words, anything I can think of, I can play out with my action figures,
Right.
or even with one or two friends that
Sure.
I could convince to kind of go along with me into the park so that we could be Jedi, or
Right.
what have you. Um, what was a little bit tough, starting in with my formal career in the 90s, was to understand that each medium imposed limitations on imagination.
Yeah.
And if I did not understand the production process in that medium, there would be nothing but frustration for me.
Mm.
So learning how to make a comic book, how to make a video game, how to make a movie,
Yeah.
was extremely important, and at first not particularly interesting because it involved understanding technology, understanding programming, understanding the complex and often difficult process of drawing comic books and inking them and coloring them and putting them through the printing process and then the distribution process and so forth. Kind of a drag. But learning them made it much easier to tell stories in those media, and even to orchestrate stories across the different media platforms, which is my job today.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. As someone that one of the reasons I love Dungeons and Dragons so much is because I always loved my imagination. Me and my younger brother, we made an entire superhero universe that would rival like Marvel or DC. Like, we have all these things. We had created like laws of physics, how different planes worked and all of that. But the one thing, and we've talked about this as adults, of like the one thing that was like difficult was like, there's a time when you're two people talking about superpowers and stuff like that, where like you hit that point of like, well, my character is stronger than yours, and it's like, well, mine's stronger than yours by 1. It's like, I'm infinitely I'm infinitely plus 1. I'm like, okay, it's just it just hits this point where like there's nothing stopping anything from getting too ridiculous for no reason, and that's something that I loved about Dungeons and Dragons is like, your imagination is not being stopped. It's being hindered by rules of the universe that keep it in some sort of balance, and like being able to understand like what is not stopping, but slowing you down in those things and being able to work around them is something that I was actually just talking about yesterday at D&D, because I was talking about a one shot I'm going to do for Christmas, and they're like, are you okay with homebrew characters? I'm like, absolutely. My last thing that I ran back home was literally a bunch of people going up against a 2 times the size of a Tarrasque plasmoid-esque character from another world. They weren't supposed to fight it. They were not supposed to fight it, but the characters that my players had picked was not like Tabaxi. It was a cat that could speak with a ladle. That was it. Eventually, one of the characters gave him like a pan lid for a shield, so the ladle and a shield. One of my players was playing the paladin Shrek with his donkey. Another one was playing Steve Irwin as the Asian kobolds, which are more like dog-like. But Steve Irwin as a ranger kobold. and Eric Crooker Monk, who that player was playing their regular character. But I'm just like, you guys are playing some interesting things, but like, they were just having fun, and like I went through rules and like made sure that everything was going fine. I'm like, I'm okay with your imagination doing whatever, as long as you're working within the confines and explaining why it does work. As long as I have a why and like you have a reason behind it and how it's working, I'm fine with it. And like those confines though do direct the path, and switching from different role-playing games have different things. You're like, you can do that. It's just going to be a lot harder than in this other thing. And I can somewhat guess as to how exponentially different that is when you're talking about the difference between making a live action show versus an animated show versus, a cartoon movie versus a comic book versus an audio drama versus, like as you're changing these medias, because different, like I've watched, I've consumed a lot of media in my time and watched as people have done better in different mediums than others because of the confines of what they didn't realize. I've seen those faults of, we tried to switch it to another medium and it didn't quite hit the same, and they go ahead.
Let me say what you're saying.
Okay.
Again, and yet apply it to my current professional situation. Okay.
Absolutely.
So To me, Dungeons and Dragons originally was an excuse to keep playing make believe, right? I was a little long in the tooth to be running around in the park being a Jedi. So we're going to sit around at this table, and I was going to fantasize and integrate you, the player, into my fantasy.
Mhm.
And so for me, the rules were kind of a loose framework,
Sure.
because the story was more important to me. Well, when I got into college, and I'm going to name names here, there was this dude named Greg Sherwood. Greg
Okay.
Sherwood was obnoxious, but he was brilliant, and he
Oh.
wanted to be in my game. And I was hesitant because, well, obnoxious,
Right.
but I knew he was a good player. So I let him play in my game, and he saw immediately that I was playing fast and loose with the rules, the Advanced
Oh.
Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition rules. So I would see him occasionally roll his eyes. I mean, he was basically respectful, but he'd go, "That's not the rules." And
Passive respectful instead of passive aggressive.
exactly. So it would irritate me because in my head I knew he was right. um,
Right.
and so eventually I took him aside and said, "What's the problem here?"
Mhm.
And this was away from everyone. And he said, "Look, you're the best storyteller, that I've ever played with. But when you do this, I feel as if I don't have as good a chance as your star character because I've noticed that the rules bend around your key players.
Mm,
And that it makes me feel as if it's a little not fair, a little like I have to be like them if I'm going to get more attention from you,
yeah.
right?" And I
Yeah.
said, "You know what? It's a good point. And I want to be fair. I want you to enjoy this game. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to be my whip. In other words, I'm going to brush up on the rules, but you're going to help me and be a part of the game
Yeah.
by occasionally calling a rule out when I need it." And that made him feel needed, wanted, and a part of it. So even though his role was not a major one, as major as the others, he felt he had something important to do while he built up his character because he was new,
Yeah.
and so forth. And it was great. It was great. I felt better. Everyone later on told me, it actually feels a little more fair. Even the ones who were
Mm,
the stars were like, "You
yeah.
know what? I feel better about this because there's more structure to the underlying physics of the game."
Yeah. I mean
And
leads to the continuity again, like that we were talking about earlier, of like
exactly,
people like
the
continuity, and if
integrity.
right, and if that
That's right.
changes every once in a while, it's like, well, you know,
Right, right.
then it's
And
like, well,
I'd bend them now and then,
sure,
and he would go, "Dramatic purpose." He would, "Okay, we're being dramatic,"
yeah,
and that's fine. That was
right,
funny to me. So
yeah,
here I am, working with the Walt Disney Company,
hmm
and I'm telling a story, and the story is a dream come true. For me, and so I'm paying all this attention to canon and to the detail of the story, and there is a Greg Sherwood who is assigned to my project, and he sometimes tells me, you know, in this medium and in the way that our culture, our company does things, it really doesn't fly too well. I could have been really hurt and upset and be antagonistic to him, and instead I remembered Greg
that's really
and said,
cool.
"You know what? You've been at this for years. You know your stuff.
Yeah,
So I'm going to listen to you."
Yeah.
And if it breaches the fundamental message, my dramatic purpose, we'll to talk about it and maybe compromise. But by and
Yeah.
large, I'm going to listen to you, and it worked. It made it much less upsetting for me, and
Yeah.
much more of a thing that's allowing for the whole project to be propelled forward quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to your listening, you know,
There you go.
listening and being heard. Like, you can find out like when people are just trying to be jerks, or if they're actually trying to help and make things a better place for people.
That's
And
right.
that does take a big person to go, I'm going to listen to you. I'm not just going to get upset about things just because you're saying something I don't necessarily agree with right now, but let me actually hear you out, hear what you're saying, and process that properly.
I'm not saying it's easy, Joel.
No, I wasn't accusing you of saying that. I'm just saying it does take a big person to take that and take that as advice, and take that and like actually process it versus just dismissing it as, well, but this is my thing and I'm in charge. And I've definitely worked with people
Yeah,
that do that.
I hear you, Joel. I don't tend to think of it as being a big person. I tend to think of it as being a person who wants to succeed. That's all.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
there aren't very many dictators in the world where it ends wonderfully.
Sure. 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 I definitely can agree with that one. Uh, yeah, no, that's a very valid point. Um, so I, as I said before, this podcast is geared towards people that are learning. So for someone listening out there that they're thinking about maybe getting into this industry, what would be the top 3 skills that they would need to be in this industry?
Um, you're talking about media and entertainment
Yeah.
as a broad business.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, sure. Um, uh, the the first edict, the rule, the thing you've got to understand is that there is a big difference between your fantasy of what's going to happen and what actually happens, how it
Mm,
works. So I need you to understand how it works. Okay. I can't tell you how many kids I talk to who want to create Japanese anime, right?
mm, yeah.
Or they want their Star Wars to be the next big project, their version of
Right.
Star Wars, and so forth. And then I go, okay, name me 10 animators, or who are your favorite directors, and so they can't do it.
Right.
They like a few different things, and then that's it. They don't know the business, they don't know the industry, they don't know how it works, who the
Yeah.
people are who are making this stuff. And you can't fold your arms and blink and suddenly there's a giant animated feature.
Right. Right.
So learning the business and understanding fundamentally what it is number one. Number two is, no matter what it is that you're working on, finish it.
Mm,
Finish it, finish it, finish it. If you can't finish it, nobody's going to, look at what it is that you're doing.
yeah.
Nobody's going
They
to
don't care.
care,
Yeah.
because if you can't complete a task, the media and entertainment business and most businesses won't be interested in
Right.
you. And that's not easy to do. I've seen 1,000 half-finished comic books.
Oh, that
you
hurts.
know, and number three, the last one is um, uh, to find a social media platform that you can express yourself on creatively, and have that be a link that you can send to people in the business so that they could look at what it is that you're doing and appreciate the best of your work. So only put the very best there. And if it's not good enough, don't put it there.
Right.
You know, and that way, um, in this day and age, there's no such thing as a resume anymore. If someone talks to me about some new talent out there that's really interesting, I go send their links to me. I'm going to go look, and if I like it, there's got to be a way for me to contact that person on that site, and suddenly there's a conversation. That's happened, by the way, many times for me. And then there are other very talented people who don't have that, and I can't be bothered. I'm not going to go chase down someone who it isn't easy to communicate with. So those are the top 3 things that I would advise for your audience to think about.
Okay, I like that. That's very insightful. Was there anything in doing like transmedia storytelling that was way harder than you were expecting, like that you thought was going to be a little easier but wasn't?
Ooh. The hardest aspect of my job is when I encounter toxicity.
Okay.
And fortunately, I've gotten really good at spotting it quickly, because then I could turn down the job. Because if I'm in the middle of a job and I see toxicity, it's super hard to fix it.
Yeah.
So what's an example of toxicity? There's somebody who is fixated on what it is that needs to be communicated, and in doing so, there would be blockages. What they're doing would make a huge portion of the audience angry, or is not serving the intellectual property. It's serving their personal interests.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? That happens all the time in Hollywood. And for me, when you hire me, I am the custodian of your myth, not your personality. You know, it is Master Chief who will transcend time, not necessarily the executives at Microsoft, right? And so if you're telling me no, it's got to be me, and so forth, that's less interesting for me, and that makes it difficult.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, sorry, what you're talking about that. I've been watching the show Bull, who's a jury consultant, and like his whole job is to like help using psychology, help the lawyer tell a story that they're trying to tell. And it's like, I know they built this in on purpose, but like one of the things he runs into a lot is people going, well, I just think you're wrong. It's like, you hired me, the professional in this industry. You know the law. I know people on the jury. Let me do my job. Like, well, I'm going to do it my way. It's like, well, and then it's like, they didn't like that. It's like, I told you they weren't going to like that, you know? And like that, like, if you're going to hire me to do a specific job, and then you're going to tell me don't do that specific job until I want you to, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to help you do this very specific thing. And if you're going, well, I don't like the fact that you're telling me what I asked you to tell me right now, can you wait till later on the other smaller? It's like, okay, then just don't have me. Just don't have me.
It's happened many times, and what I do in those things is I'm a little detached, and I go, here are your choices, and if you stay your course, here's what's going to happen, because it's happened 1,000 times.
You've watched it. You're a professional. You've
Yeah.
done this. You've done this. You've done this a lot of times. This is what you do. And you can go, the reason I'm telling you this is because this will lead to this. And if you don't do that, it's to lead to this.
20th Century Fox and Avatar. Ubisoft was contacted and asked to do a video game of the original Avatar within 1 year of the release of the film. And I said, guys, it's not a good idea. And they said, why? And I said, well, because what Ubisoft is going to be forced to do is to use an established and dusty game engine, and they're going to have to slap it together quickly, and it's not going to be good. And they go, what are you talking about? Video games are easy, because they have no idea.
Yeah, because that's why GTA 6 is already out so fast and everything. It's super easy.
I told them, if you fail with this video game, you are going to remove a vital piece of the franchise that will exist in between your movies,
Right.
and you don't want that. And they go, what do you mean vital? It's a video game. And I said, if you see the trajectory, here's where video games are headed, because this was 10, 15 years ago.
True.
You're going to wish that you had gotten this right. And of course they did not. And, what happened. We had to wait a long time before Avatar got back on the public radar.
Yeah.
So,
because quick to that point, like, I don't even remember that video game coming out, but the video game that I've wanted to play and I haven't had the time and funds at the same time to buy the oh gosh, what is the new one that came out on the PS5 and everything? But is I can't think of the name right now, but like, I've been wanting to play that. I've seen the gameplay of it, and like, I've seen the ads for it, and it looks amazing.
Oh, there you go.
It looks immersive. It's a new story.
That's
right. And I'm engaged in that, but I don't even remember that there was an Avatar video game based off of the original movie.
Off the original movie. That's right.
Yeah.
And nobody does. So,
right.
So,
like, case in point.
Right. So at least the lesson was learned. And those are the sorts of challenges that I face that, you can't win them all.
Right. Was there, on the other side, hopefully it's a little happier, what was something that was easier than you were expecting? You thought it was going to be a challenge and it just wasn't. It just kind of flowed.
Wow. All the work is hard work. Joel. But working with the Disney team actually has been a little easier than I expected, and maybe that's because of the experience that I have. I'm a little older and have seen it all and so forth, but just as much, it's because there are executives and talented people who believe in the message of the story, and when that happens, it's just wonderful for me, and all the bundle of nerves that I had, walking into the situation, kind of dissipated once I learned that.
That's cool. So in your life of interview, I mean, I've seen dozens of interviews just as like in LinkedIn on all sorts of platforms since I first was pointed towards you. I have seen interviews pop up all the time. Is there a question that people just never ask that you wish someone would ask?
Oh my gosh. You've asked a lot of them, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Which I do appreciate, because it's important to me that you understand that I'm not that much of an exception. You know, um, uh, I'm not a genius. You
Mm.
know, I'm certainly not Brad Pitt. So, so that I've been able to navigate things and make so many of my childhood dreams come true. You know, to listen for how that happened, and to hear me, and hopefully you can see that these were not impossible things
Right.
that I did. They were all about really um, learning that, you know, doing the impossible is kind of fun. You know,
Yeah. Okay.
leaning into these challenges, not being afraid to take the blinders off and look at all the possibilities, even
Mm.
ones that you kind of oppose, like having someone telling the rules into your ear, Greg Sherwood,
Yeah.
can manifest into something wonderful and positive. So you've asked those questions, and I appreciate that.
I really appreciate it. There's times where I have a little bit of imposter syndrome when it comes to interviewing, because I'm like, I'm sure, like, especially I'll be very honest, watching those interviews come up and like fighting the urge to listen to them and try and listen to every interview you've done, and like I was like, you know what? I'm actually not going to listen to any of the interviews he's done. I don't want to try and compare myself to them, because like, one is it affects me. I have a very specific goal with my interviews, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like it. It all comes down to like, where is this person coming from, and I don't want what other people's goals to interfere with that. But there was this nagging thing of like, I should definitely make sure that I'm being better, because I think out of everyone that I've interviewed on my show, you're the person that has done the most interviews, you know, and by professionals versus, you know, just barely above hobbyists. I'm making a couple bucks a month on podcasts, but like, I'm not a professional, quote unquote. But I'm sitting there. I was very nervous about like, he's gonna be bored. Like, he's gonna be like, I don't know. I had some very, very heavy like uh worries about my ability to podcast and like interview somebody with somebody that's done so many. And I'm sitting there going like, and so that actually is very, very encouraging, that I am asking questions that someone that has been interviewed on a fairly regular basis, it sounds like, that I'm asking questions that haven't been asked to you on a regular basis, is actually really encouraging and to me.
This is an example, Joel, of the theme of our time together, in doing a little bit of homework,
Mm.
enough to understand where you're coming from, which
Mm.
emerges out of my past in
Yeah.
terms of getting my players together. I learned enough so that I can modulate what I have to say. Generally, when you listen to me in all these interviews, there's a thematic threads that connect
Sure.
all of them.
Yeah.
But I get bored. Why would I want to say the exact same thing over and over again?
Sure.
Who's this guy, Circo?
Right.
What's he into? What's going
Yeah.
to make the conversation interesting for both of us?
Yeah.
And it's a win-win.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, I feel like there's certain overlaps of our personality, because like I try and learn just enough about the person to spark my curiosity and tailor the questions to them. I mean, I have a fairly standardized set of questions, but in those questions, I lay them out in different ways for different people. And then obviously the conversation is king. Like, whatever the conversation takes us, my curiosity doesn't go, well, you have another question to get to. It's like every once in a while, like I do eventually have to get to something else, because that has other things that I want to learn, and I will be kicking myself if I don't learn them. But
Sure.
like, in those questions, I even write out specific questions for different people, because like, this, not all the questions apply to everybody. And also, there's some things like, I'm not asking most people what a transmedia company is, but like, you know, I'm tailoring it to my guest that I'm going to have on. and you're tailoring your expectation to the interview you're gonna be interviewing with. And so I do appreciate that
So we're jamming.
exactly. I do appreciate that mesh of like you've done just enough to kind of see where I'm coming from, and I've done just enough research to get my interview tailored to you, and I think it works very well, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Super cool.
Yeah. So are there any faux pas in the industry that like somebody that's trying to reach out to you should know, or that you wish more people knew about, like the media production industry?
I get this once a week, maybe every other week. I have an idea that's worth $1 billion.
Uh-huh.
And I go, you better do better than that, dude, with me. And they'll say, you know, any time the conversation goes past that, it's no, really, I just have an idea. If you just do it all, we can split it 50-50, and we'll both be rich. And I go, well, that's not how it works. You
Right.
know, um, uh, again, I use that term, fold your arms and blink, because there was a
Right.
sitcom called I Dream of Jeannie in the
Right.
1970s, where she would fold her arms and blink, and whatever she's thinking of actually manifested.
Right.
um,
I didn't realize that's what you're referencing, but that makes
yeah.
more sense now.
And I go, I'm not going to fold my arms and blink. It's just not
Right.
going to happen. It's hard enough to do my stuff. I'm not going to do
Right.
yours, and get it all done. So, so doing the work and understanding what it is that you want, and understanding the practical steps toward achieving that
Yeah.
is vital. I'm glad to teach them to you, but you're going to have to pay me to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Or watch my videos.
But walking up saying, I have an IP that you can buy and make and then split it 50-50 with me, because it's just the first time anyone's ever thought of this. Here you go, give me my 50%, is just not, that's not how anything.
And by the way, it never is something that no one ever thought of.
Well, yeah, no, I've talked with a few writers, and one of the things that we've discussed a few times is what is it, 16 story plots or whatever it is. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's
Sure.
like something like 16 different plot points that you can put into any story.
That's
Like, you just remix them, you mix up some characters, like you can add different things, but the idea is already there somewhere. Someone's already written it somewhere.
That's right.
You know, it's not that you aren't the first person to think of this thing, and but yeah.
Right.
So don't try and pitch a thing that you get to do all the work and I get to get half the benefits for.
You think that would be obvious, but it's not.
Hey, that's one of the things that I like, that I do appreciate when people I ask that question, is sometimes it's something that really should be obvious, which is why it's kind of a faux pas. It's like, it shouldn't need to be a rule. It shouldn't need to be said. It shouldn't need to be explicitly pointed out. But for those who need that extra help,
That's
there
right.
it is.
And the only other thing I'd recommend is that if you are going to reach out to me to talk about something, it's best to study enough about me to understand who I am and what I do.
Sure. Yeah.
Because again, I don't have specialties in all these other different areas, and
Right.
I'm not going to invest in your movie,
Right.
or your real estate, or what have you.
Yeah. And you know who you're talking to before you talk to them.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. If you could put a PSA out for everybody regarding, I mean, you can take this whatever you want to, but if you could put a PSA out to everybody, like, about your industry, what would it be? Like, is there something that more people should know that you wish you could tell them?
About my industry, yes. My industry is starving um, not necessarily for new ideas, although that's helpful, but for perspectives.
Okay.
Right now, we are seeing one of the biggest generation gaps since
Mm,
the 1960s in
wow.
terms of the perspectives and outlooks between the older adults who are in power right now and youth.
Mm,
Um, and uh, and so what's happening in the entertainment business is that they're guessing. They're not
mm,
they're not talking. They're not listening carefully, not just to the text, but to the subtext of
yeah.
the different perspectives of young people in this country. It's why box office has come down. A lot of ratings have come down in terms of what people want to watch on the
Yeah.
major networks and even the major streaming networks. It's why TikTok is now so incredibly popular, and some other more obscure platforms.
Sure.
They're losing touch.
Yeah.
So what you need to do if you want to become a part of this business is to show me that you can articulate clearly what it is that you see, what you're observing, how you're perceiving the world, why
Yeah.
you're seeing things the way you're seeing them, so that I can understand that you've got it.
Yeah.
I need you.
Yeah.
You know, I need you to come and create for me because I don't get it. Things are moving too fast.
Yeah.
You can help me and help guide me. That's
Right.
really important. And the way to do that is to express yourself clearly and articulately through your
Yeah.
social media.
Not just see things, but be able to essentially forge glasses that other people can see through your perspective.
Perfect, Joel. That's a great analogy.
Thank you. I am pretty good with those usually. But yeah. All right. I do like that because it is something that I have seen of just like there's certain things that just like who is this targeting? I don't know. And nobody I know knows. And I have a pretty broad spectrum of friends across pretty much any sort of way you want to measure uh, people. I have a broad spectrum of friends on every side of everything, and like there's times where I'm like, I don't know who this movie was targeted at, and nobody I talk to knows
Why
either.
is Craven here? Why is he here?
Yeah, there's no lead up to it. It's just I'm like my brother-in-law is really excited about Craven, and I'm like, I'll be honest, I liked Craven, but I have missed a lot of the context of it because he's like, well, he's technically like an anti-hero type thing, and like, well, everything I've seen him in, which most of that is like early 2000s Sunday like funny strips, Spider-Man, he's a villain there. He's a
Sure.
straight up villain there. And then all of a sudden I'm seeing this, I mean, that's my perspective of Craven, and that's all the context I have of him until all of a sudden he's now this semi-hero movie coming out, and I'm like, it looks cool. I'm not super connected with Craven though, you know. But yeah, but that perspective of like who is being targeted, like, and having that new generation, like worldview glasses that they can see and go, here's why we shouldn't be telling this story. And also the other side of that is also not dismissing, because I've heard from people that are in that generation that is missing, that they're being dismissed in their perspective. Is like, well, you're too young to understand. It's like, do you want my advice or not? you know so being able to be heard in that industry, and like as well as being able to build that perspective for somebody else.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. um for someone that is listening to this episode and they're like, oh my gosh, this is my calling, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing, what would be your advice to someone just starting for like the media, like transmedia production?
Follow me. Look at everything I do and say, look at most of what I do is not a secret. I'm glad
Mhm.
to share it, and I have. So there's many videos. There's a
Mhm.
TED talk from 15 years ago.
Cool.
There's all kinds of information that I've put out there about what I do, even step-by-step instructions.
Okay.
So follow me and keep up with what I'm doing, and then if it's transmedia specifically that you'd like to get
Mhm.
involved with, you need to articulate your understanding of it. You
Mhm.
need to give us your perspective on what transmedia narrative or narrative design in general is
Yeah.
about, because a lot of people still don't know or understand it, and so if you may have a way of communicating it that I'm not doing, that
Right.
will get you a job,
Yeah.
and that's happened with many people, including a lot of students of mine,
Yeah.
and that's great as far as I'm concerned. Go ahead and do it that way.
Okay. So, like, are you talking about like how you described what you do as like building bridges with communication and stuff like that? Like having you, was that what you mean by your way of describing that?
That's my purpose in doing it, but
Gotcha.
I have a very elaborate description for the process of transmedia practice.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're talking about the
And
practice,
that's all out
not
there,
just okay.
right?
I
Yeah.
wanted to clarify that for myself because I was a little confused. So,
No
um,
problem.
yeah. If you could go back in time, you had a small portal open up that you have a short period of time to talk to your younger self, and you can pick what period of time that is that you're giving your advice to. But if you could give yourself advice back in time, what would that be, and when about would that be?
It would be around 12.
Okay. All right.
And it would be, dude, take the blinders off right now. Take the
All
blinders off.
right.
Your the way you're thinking even now is the future, and you need to understand that you have to be confident about this approach,
Mm-hmm.
and pursue it. Think bigger and bigger and bigger, so that you can succeed faster, so that you can be ripped off less, and so that you can learn to value what it is that you have to contribute to the world, before you even start your company.
Yeah.
And that way, you will move to success just a lot faster, and do more of what you dreamed when you're younger.
Yeah.
That's all.
All right. Let's just widen the perspective. Just
That's
I
right.
like that. Um, so I one of my favorite questions, which if you've heard in my interview, you've heard it before, but the magic snap. If you could just, I mean, you are in a successful company right now, but if you could snap your fingers, no strings attached, just be put in a spot where your ideals are, where you want to be, what would that look like right now?
Um, what I want, Joel, is for people to understand how story works. Um,
Okay.
I'm really concerned, and sorry to make it serious,
No worries.
because um, uh, so many people around the world are perceiving everything highly subjectively, right? So information is flowing into our brains,
Right.
and we are immediately deciding what is right and what is wrong,
Okay.
um, without understanding that people's perception of right and wrong are driven by many, many factors. A lot of them rooted in personal trauma, in shame, in things that were inflicted upon us that we were helpless to change, and they formed our sense of judgment in our adulthood that can be destructive because we don't want to hear it if something is being communicated to us that doesn't conform to our sense of right and wrong. And we now have the capability to fight one another as a result of that impression, that subjective viewpoint. That fighting is generating chaos because it's everywhere, all around the world. And that is because we are lost in our own stories. And so if I could do something, if I could do the snap, it would be, here's how story works, and here's how we can arrive at a common sensibility, a set of foundational values, which, by the way, we kind of have. That's what myth is all about. That's what not religion, but myth. Myth is an instruction book. Here is the wisdom of thousands of years of human history. And we manifest that wisdom in mythology. Right? And when we learn that wisdom, that ancient wisdom, we understand that actually we have far more in common with one another than differences. The nuances of story are sometimes being used to separate us and make us hate each other. And historically, when that happens, civilizations collapse. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There are big problems. War breaks out on a cosmic scale.
Yeah.
That's no good. No good. So, in my own little tiny way, I enjoy coding story to remind people that we are together. And unity is better than being divided. And I've done that with entertainment, but once in a while I do it in geopolitical situations as a consultant to governments and non-government organizations, charities, things like that, and it works. So I'd like to upscale that a little bit if I could snap my fingers.
Gotcha.
Sorry to be so serious and weird, but
it is your magic snap. I have never judged anybody on their magic snap. I've been surprised. I've been intrigued. I've been overjoyed at people's responses, but never judge. It's your magic snap, and it is yours to do with what they want. With what you want to do with that. But I've had somebody just literally like, I wouldn't change a thing. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Like, that's awesome that you're in a spot that if you were given just unlimited magic, you wouldn't change a thing. Is really cool. That's awesome. But
you must be really rich.
They're not at all. Like
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was something that they're just content. They're perfectly content. And like, I'm saying, like, I wish I could, my magic style now would be to have that like level of contentment with just being, but
I fancy myself an artist, so I never can be 100% content.
That's fair. But yeah. So I have a couple more questions. The first one is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
In The Lord of the Rings, in one of the darkest moments, Frodo turns to Gandalf and says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time," meaning the Great War, the darkness, Sauron, the Ring. And Gandalf says, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Really good quote.
And I learned that quote, Joel, when I was 12 or 13 years old, and that was some of the darkest times I'd ever experienced. The veneer of innocence in my childhood was being left behind. I was starting to remember the chaos of my early childhood, abuse that I suffered, trauma that I experienced, and I was being haunted by it, and it felt overwhelming. And I'm reading this Tolkien book, and when Gandalf says that, and I was Frodo. I was bearing the ring. It was a terrible burden. There was a darkness inside of me because I was afflicted with a spectrum disorder and so forth. I didn't understand what was even happening to me,
Right.
but it felt bad. And here he's saying, look, you are bearing a tough burden, but you have the choice. You have the choice to do what it is that needs to be done. And in having the choice, you can choose to continue to bear this and to get the job done. You know? And that was so important to me.
Yeah.
It never was easy, but I pursued it as Frodo did, and it kind of worked out for him. So I loved Gandalf for that, and I loved Tolkien for putting those words in Gandalf's mouth and sending them to me over the course of decades. It made me want to be able to do that for others.
Yeah, but no. Tolkien has some really good stuff, and that quote I've heard a few times as and it's a powerful message for a fantasy book dealing with a magic ring that they have to destroy in a volcano. But like, it's a very impactful, very real piece of encouragement, because that's something that every generation has these different things that they are facing, that they feel like they're like, why did I have to be here? It's like, well, you know what the people in the Great Depression were asking? Why did I have to be the one that's dealing with this? Everybody's had those moments that they're like, well, no other generations dealt with the Great War. It's like, well, yeah. And then there's World War II that they're like, well, no one's had to deal with. Like, every generation has something they feel overwhelmingly like this weight on them about. And having that advice of, you don't get to decide when you're born and what the burdens of your time period are. It's up to you to decide how you deal with that. It's up to you to decide how you handle that. You have that responsibility, because everyone has had a responsibility similar to that. It's different for everybody. Each individual person has their own things that they're dealing with. You don't get to choose those. You do get to choose how you react to those, which is a quote that it's a piece of advice I apparently gave to one of my friends ages ago when I was very young, and they actually gave it to me back in like a framed quote of like, you don't get to choose how other people act. You only get to choose how you react to them.
There you go.
And it's like, you don't get to pick what happens to you, but it is entirely your responsibility of how you react to the things you were given.
Precisely.
Yeah. Hopefully this one's a little bit lighter. But this is Curious Joel, and one of the things that I want to know is, what is something that you are currently curious about? What is something that you are learning? What is something that has been like stimulating your brain and your creativity?
I've traveled the world, Joel, and this might be a little controversial, but there is hesitation here in the United States about artificial intelligence.
Okay.
There is no hesitation elsewhere in the world. It is being rapidly adapted and integrated, not just into the production processes of everything, but also into the end product. with no hesitation. We need to understand how much of a paradigm shift that's going to be. And I am, although I have my trepidations about it, of course,
Sure.
it is something that must be studied by all of us. We must
Right.
understand it. If we don't understand it, we're all going to slip into the matrix. So we need to understand it. And part of that is there an optimistic outcome here? Is there something that can happen that is positive? And one of those things is that there is a paradigm shift in terms of creation. If we all can create something, anything that we can think of,
Right.
within the next 5 or 10 years, imagine it and suddenly, boom, it manifests. Then what is art? How do we elevate that and make it into something that can touch us and teach us and lift us, and that is a whole new mindset. That is a different way of being, and a different way of expressing ourselves. What's that going to be? I'm really curious about that.
Okay. I like that. It's really cool. So this brings us kind of to the end. Like I said at the beginning, I gave you a heads up. Is there anything that we didn't talk about long enough? Was there any questions I didn't ask that you want to talk about right now?
No, just jump onto my socials. I right now, I'm producing. I'm a transmedia producer for Ultraman. So if you go on X, you're going to see a lot of Ultraman.
Okay.
My Facebook page is more kind of my personal life and so forth. Whoever's interested in that, and a lot of Ultraman, but LinkedIn is where I talk about business and talk about my some of my ideas about media and entertainment and so forth. So you can follow me. I'm an easy Google. So follow me on LinkedIn. It'd be great to be connected to members of your audience, whether or not they have an interest in my particular job.
I will say, with a brief look through your LinkedIn, because that seemed to be one of the more popular things. LinkedIn isn't something I go to very often, but like, because most of the people, it's just reposting something someone else posted, and it's, for the most part, from what I've seen, not super interesting to me. But once I started following you, I saw like you have some very interesting stuff going up about interesting topics. Like I said, several interviews and stuff like that. So, and yeah, you're the first guest I've had on that if someone just Googles you, they kind of have most of everything they need to follow you. Which is nice, but I will still try, and for my audience, I will still try and put links in the show description as well for you. But yeah, and then I'll also link Starlight Runner, because that's a great little link that shows you a lot about what Jeff does. That first banner gives you a few big ticket like companies that and projects that they've worked on, right on the top.
Excuse the site, it needs a makeover, audience. So sorry about that. It's a little outdated, but yes,
it still looks good, and it still has a lot of pertinent and relevant information. So there is that. Yeah. So no other things that we need to dive in more, or questions that weren't asked.
We've been at this 2 hours, dude.
I always like to double check before I just kind of round things off at the end. But yeah. All right. So with that being said, Jeff, I very much appreciate you taking a decent chunk out of your day to be on my show. I really appreciate that.
You got it, Joel.
Yeah. All right. Well, to me, as usual, my Patreon, I'm trying to push this to a hopefully at least a part-time job in the meantime. But I would love to be doing podcasting full time, being able to dedicate everything. And if you want to support that, go to patreon.com/Curious Joel, and you can support me. You get to hear, well, I just realized we didn't do our pre-interview icebreakers, so we might have to do that after. But for most interviews,
you were incorporating them into the
nope, totally slipped. Just totally slipped my mind.
We just little kind of sub chunks. You were
no. We just completely forgot those. But we can knock them really quick after this. Okay. But so most of them, they're pre-interview icebreaker questions. I'd post those on there. I do usually post the episodes before I finish them, or before you hear them on normal platforms. You get to hear them first on my Patreon. And then I also am producing small little episodes for Car Talk episodes where just me and somebody driving, having just a conversation. Interesting conversations, but conversations. So you can check all that out on Patreon, and that supports this channel, helps support the things I am investing into this channel. So feel free to do that. You can find me on Instagram at CuriousJoelCast, or email me at curiousjoelcast@gmail.com. And there's other ways to reach me if you just look at any of my stuff. But please, if you have people that you think I should be interviewing, please let me know. If you have questions that I should be asking, please also let me know. Thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, stay curious, y'all.